The Oklahoma State Fair was always a mix of excitement and heat. The air was thick with dust, the sun beating down hard on the metal roofs, making the auction barn feel like an oven. But that day, it wasn't just the heat that had me sweating. I'd driven 3 hours to get there, mostly to support my neighbor, Old Man Morrison, who was selling a few of his herd. You see, Morrison's family had been ranching for generations, and I had a deep respect for the man and his way of judging cattle. I didn't come to buy anything just to be there, to show some support. I grabbed a cup of lukewarm coffee from the concession stand, sat in the back row, and watched the auction unfold. There were some big players in the crowd, wealthy ranchers from Texas and Montana, their shiny boots and polished vests reflecting the wealth they had. I could tell they were all here to snatch up the prime stock, the kind of cattle worth thousands, whose bloodlines could be traced back decades. They were the top tier, the best of the best, the kind of animals you'd see in glossy magazine spreads. But as the afternoon dragged on, the crowd started thinning. The top dollar bulls had already been sold, bought by the big operations. Now, they were down to the last lots, mostly older cattle, some with minor defects, that the fancy ranches wouldn't touch. I leaned back in my seat, watching the auctioneer's voice echo through the barn, the buzz of the crowd slowly dying down. "Last lot of the day, folks," the auctioneer called, wiping sweat from his brow with a red bandana. "Adult bull, no papers, been through some hard times. Let's start the bidding at $200. A groan escaped the crowd as a bull stumbled into the ring. This was no prized beast. He looked like he'd been through hell. His ribs stuck out, his hide was patchy and torn, and open sores dotted his flanks. The bull's head hung low in exhaustion, barely able to stand. The crowd laughed. A young cowboy from a Dallas ranch muttered, "That thing ain't even worth hamburger meat." But as I looked at that bull, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more. Despite the obvious suffering, I could see the fire in his eyes. It was like looking at my father, near the end of his days in the Tulsa hospital, holding on to life with a stubborn grip that refused to let go. That bull, despite everything, refused to give in. The auctioneer's voice dropped in enthusiasm. "200, anybody? How about 150? This old boy is heading straight to the processing plant if nobody speaks up. Last call, folks." Before I knew what was happening, my body was already immovying, my hand raised. 100. I called out, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent arena. The heads turned, some in surprise, others in amusement. I didn't even think about it. I just couldn't let the poor animal be slaughtered without giving it a chance. The auctioneer, clearly relieved to get any bid, nodded. 100, going once, going twice, sold to buyer number 47. As I walked down to finish the paperwork, I could hear the whispers. "City boy doesn't know what he's doing. He threw away good money on a walking death sentence." But I didn't care. I'd grown up on a ranch, and I knew exactly what I was doing even if I couldn't fully explain why I was doing it. Carlos, my hired hand, didn't seem too optimistic either as we loaded the bull into my trailer. He collapsed twice before we could even get him secure. "Boss, that bull ain't gonna make it through the week," Carlos said, shaking his head as he passed the fairground's exit sign. The sun hung low in the sky as we headed back home. "Maybe not," I said quietly, my hands gripping the wheel, "but he deserves better than dying alone in some processing plant." When we got back to the ranch, I unloaded the bull into a small pasture away from the other cattle. The place was quiet, perfect for a broken animal needing some peace. The land was old, about 30 miles southeast of Tulsa, where the Chisholm Trail ran alongside the property, the same path countless cattle had walked during the cattle drives of the 1800s. The Cimarron River ran along the back of the land, providing fresh water, and the oak trees offered shade from the brutal Oklahoma heat. I figured it was the perfect place for this bull to heal. The bull, whom I started calling Thunder, could barely walk to the water tank. His movements were slow, each step taking all of his energy. But somehow, he kept going. There was something about him that spoke to me. Maybe it was that same stubborn will I'd seen in my father. Maybe it was just that I saw a part of myself in that bull, broken but not beyond repair. The next morning, I called Doc Martinez, a vet who'd been around long enough to know the ins and outs of any kind of livestock. He'd delivered calves for my grandfather and seen more than his fair share of hardship in the cattle business. When he arrived the next day, I saw the skepticism on his face. "Jake, son," Doc said as he examined Thunder, "I've known your family since before you were born. Your granddad was one of the smartest cattlemen in Oklahoma. Serve you, I've had the Dust Bowl and everything. But this bull," he shook his head. severe malnutrition, parasites, and infections. I'm surprised he's still standing. Thunder stood there, of ying as Doc went through the motions, checking him over. His breathing was labored, his body sagging, but there was a stillness in his eyes that told me he wasn't gying up just yet. He's got fight left in him, I said, gently brushing my hand down his neck. His coat was rough, patchy, but under all the neglect, I could feel the solid bone structure. Doc sighed, loading up his supplies. I'll give you enough to get started, but don't get your hopes up too high, Jake. I've seen animals in this condition before. Some things are just too broken to fix. For the next 10 days, I was at Thunder's side 3 times a day administering medicine, cleaning wounds, and getting him to eat. The routine became meditative, almost peaceful. Each day I saw progress. His appetite came back, his wounds started to close, and little by little, Thunder began to trust me. But the most important sign came one morning when I found him standing by the fence, looking out at the other cattle grazing. His coat had started to fill in with its original color. His movements were still slow, but there was a light in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The real surprise came a few days later when I was brushing him down and felt raised marks on his shoulder. At first, I thought they were just old scars, but as I cleaned the area, I realized they were too regular to precise. I parted the fur, and there it was tattooed on his shoulder, barely visible under all the neglect, RW 247. I took a few photos with my phone, not knowing exactly what it meant, but feeling a sudden rush of excitement. The markings were old, but clear. Something about them told me this bull was more than just some old, sick animal I'd saved from the slaughterhouse. I called Doc Martinez back, and when he saw the tattoo, he was as shocked as I was. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, examining the marking through his magnifying glass. "This is a registration mark, but it's older than dirt. Let me make a few calls." Hours later, Doc called back with news that stopped me dead in my tracks. "Jake, you need to sit down for this," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "This bull, he's not just any bull. This mark belongs to Red Wolf Farm out of Montana. They were one of the top breeding operations in the country before they went under during the agricultural crisis." Doc went on to explain that Thunder had once been one of their prized bulls, a championship-level animal whose bloodline had been considered lost during the bankruptcy of Red Wolf Farm. Thunder wasn't just any bull, it was genetic royalty. Now here I was, Ying bought this bull for $100 at an auction, Ying he was nothing more than a dying animal, and I had no idea I'd stumbled onto a piece of cattle history. The calls started coming in, offers from wealthy ranchers who wanted to buy Thunder for hundreds of thousands of dollars. But despite the money, despite the temptation, I refused. Thunder wasn't for sale. He had earned his place here, on the land where he was given a second chance. And so Thunder stayed. The story of his miraculous recovery spread far and wide. People came from all over the country, veterans, cancer survivors, families struggling through their own battles, each finding inspiration in the story of a forgotten champion who had risen from the dead. For me, it wasn't just about saving a bull. It was about seeing value where others saw nothing. It was about second chances, not just for Thunder, but for everyone who'd ever been written off. And that's something worth believing in. What would you do if you discovered something you saved out of kindness turned out to be worth more than you could ever imagine? Share your thoughts in the comments below. What does it take to see potential where others see nothing? Let's talk about it.